as many SIV applicants as we possibly can. And we put in process the steps that actually enabled us to process at a much greater clip. The number of visas we were able to issue went from 100 in March to 813 this month. 813 visas per week. That just shows you the commitment we have.
That was State Department spokesman Ned Price giving an update on efforts to process special immigrant visas for Afghans who helped the U.S. during the 20-year war. The Washington Post reports that when it came to addressing Afghan refugees, the Biden administration spent months moving slowly despite a looming deadline for withdrawal. Some refugee advocates blamed the delays on, quote, White House concern that the influx would invite partisan political backlash amid a rush of migrants at the southern border. Washington Post diplomacy and national security reporter Missy Ryan joins me now with more on her reporting. Welcome, Missy. Thanks very much for being with us. So you report that, quote, the administration showed little public urgency to expedite visas for Afghans in the months before and immediately after Biden's announcement in April that the United States would pull U.S. forces out. Missy, what did you find was behind that lack of urgency?
Well, it seemed like there were a number of factors coming into play. One was, this extended deliberation period that happened between late January when the president took office, and then mid-April when the decision was announced. I think the administration understandably wanted to take some time to take stock of the situation, but that period didn't seem to really gel with the decision and the reality of the number of people who would have to get out in the few short months, the 4 months between April and September when President Biden had set the deadline. And even after the decision was announced in April, our sources told us that, there wasn't really the sense of urgency in terms of tackling the backlog that had been left on SIV processing and dealing with some of the bureaucratic challenges they had after the Trump administration in trying to get this issue addressed. And it just seems like maybe there wasn't a single point of ownership for this issue, or perhaps it took the extra pressure from Congress and from advocates to really get the wheels of the bureaucracy moving. And I think they only began to move in the second half of July to early August when you saw some of the first SIV arrivals. And then, in August, on August 6th, just about a week before Kabul fell, they finally made an announcement that they were going to expand the categories for Afghans who would get prioritized, sort of expedited asylum status.
And of course, all of this is unfolding in the midst of a global pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted the processing of these special immigrant visa applications?
Well, the pandemic, the Biden administration also had to deal with the fact that the Kabul embassy was at reduced staffing because there was a COVID outbreak this spring. They were on ordered departure from early in the spring. And so, that obviously was another factor. But you really have to ask the question, if there was such urgency, why did the administration not take other steps that it had within its power, which would have included, for example, bringing some of these SIV applicants, the priority 2 candidates, which is the new expanded category of prioritized Afghans, or just other Afghans who are vulnerable need? Why did they not take the step of bringing them to a place like Guam, as the United States did in 1975 at the end of the Vietnam War, when they brought over 100,000 Vietnamese to Guam in order to process and resettle them in the United States?
Well, Republican Congressman Peter Meijer of Michigan is part of a bipartisan group of lawmakers who've been pushing to expedite the visa process for Afghan allies. And he told the Post that the White House was, quote, worried about the optics because they lost control of the southern border. Missy, tell us more about accusations that politics contributed to the delays we're seeing.
Yeah, well, we certainly have heard some criticism from advocates and some members of Congress that actually that reason that you cite was partly behind the decision not to airlift out more people earlier and not to bring them to Guam, because, Biden, as he said, that could put people, make it easier for people to try to, people who might not make it through the process as they are vetted and all of that, would make it easier for them to then try to stay in the United States via other means. And the administration, according to the critics that we've talked to, say, the administration knows that immigration is a area of political vulnerability for them, and they didn't want to take any more risks on that than they needed to. Now, of course, we're in a very different situation where they're scrambling to take out not just people in the SIV pipeline, but this expanded category of Afghans, and then, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of other Afghans who, really feel like they're in risk of Taliban reprisal, but don't have any of these direct ties to the U.S. government. And so, it remains to be seen whether or not they can get out a substantial number before August 31st, or whether the president would be willing to extend that period or try to allow the Taliban, get the Taliban to allow them to do that.
All right, in our final minute, you've also reported that American military and intelligence officials were racing to devise plans for containing extremist threats emanating from Afghanistan even before the Taliban's takeover. How do they feel the withdrawal could impact the United States counterterrorism posture?
Sure. It's interesting because we spent a lot of time talking to military and security officials in the wake of the April 13th decision from Biden, or the announcement in April. And even then, people were describing a very difficult scenario where the United States was going to have to do this so-called over-the-horizon counterterrorism sport, where they would be trying to fly drones from very far away bases and, deal with a partner, and work together with the Afghans on the ground in order to collect intelligence, to potentially carry out periodic strikes, or even potentially periodic raids on the ground. And they already knew that was going to be very challenging. And now they're having to totally rethink those plans, because now they have no local partner that they can work with in order to collect intelligence on the Taliban and try to do any sort of ground partnering with security forces, that they had planned to do. And it's just a dramatically more difficult proposition. And so I think people are really grappling with that. Oh, and of course, the intelligence community and the military community believe that the Taliban has not broken fully with al-Qaeda, so that sort of compounds the threat, because now that the Taliban will be in charge, it gives greater reason to think that al-Qaeda could regain strength.
Yes, so many open questions with respect to national security. Missy Ryan for us. Missy, thank you very much.
Thank you.